Hi, I'm Delith. I had a seizure during a shift at work, and when the blood work came back, it showed zero medication in my system. Not low, not missed. Zero. For 2 months, I thought my illness was getting worse. But it wasn't. It was my family. They'd been swapping out my prescriptions for fake pills. Quietly. Carefully. Like it was normal. They told me it was all in my head, while watching me shake, collapse, nearly die. And the worst part? They smiled through every bit of it. So now I'm asking myself, if this wasn't love, what was it? I told myself it was stress, that the heat, the long hours, the rent coming due, and the out-of-pocket meds were just piling up a little too high that week, that maybe the shaking in my hands was from lack of sleep, or caffeine, or maybe because I skipped lunch again. That morning, I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. The sun had already turned the bathroom into a little oven by 7:30, bouncing off the cream tiles. My hair stuck to the back of my neck as I tried to twist the childproof cap off the prescription bottle. My fingers slipped again. I pressed the bottle to the sink and used my elbow to twist. It popped open. Finally. 2 white pills for seizures. 1 blue for the autoimmune thing. 2 yellows for the pain that never really went away since the accident. I knew the drill. I'd been on this cocktail for years now, logged each dose in the app like clockwork. But that morning, something felt off. I swallowed them dry like usual, forcing the pills down with a big gulp of water. Then I stood there a moment longer, waiting for the shaking to calm. It didn't. It had been getting worse, quietly, steadily. The tremors used to visit like a rude guest, showing up once in a while. Now they'd unpacked bags and taken a seat, but there was no time to reflect. I was already 10 minutes late. The cafe was packed by the time I got there. It always was during tourist season. Our place wasn't a franchise, just a local spot off the highway, but the muffins were good, and the iced coffee even better. I tied my apron on with shaky hands and smiled at Patricia, my manager, who gave me a once-over like she always did. "You okay, Del?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah, just need to shake it off." "Take 5 if you need." I didn't. I couldn't. Customers were already lining up, and I knew the Saturday crowd didn't wait long. It was all hands on deck. I started pouring lattes, calling names, grabbing pastries. The motion helped. For a moment, I felt like myself again, like I had control, like my body and I were on the same page. Until it happened, I'd just grabbed a tray from the counter, 2 hot drinks, and a scone for table 6. I barely made it halfway across the floor when the floor itself seemed to lurch. The world spun on a tilted axis, and the tray slipped from my grip, crashing in a blur of heat and sound. Then, darkness. Not the sleep kind of darkness, not the peaceful kind. This was heavy, pressing, chaotic, like drowning with your eyes open. When I came to, I was on my back. My body felt like it had been unplugged and hastily rebooted. Blurry faces hovered above me, Patricia's wide eyes, a customer holding a damp cloth, a man speaking quickly into his phone. You're okay, someone kept saying. But I wasn't. An ambulance ride followed. The flashing lights didn't make sense at first, but the whirring in my head and the soreness in my jaw filled in the blanks. I'd seized, hard. I remember the paramedic asking, "When was your last dose?" 7 this morning, I murmured, barely able to keep my eyes open. "You sure?" I was sure. They ran the vitals, took the app from my hands, checked my log. "Every day, 7 a.m., I told them. Never missed. He nodded, but his eyes said something else. Something colder. At the ER, the fluorescent lights stung. The air smelled like antiseptic and reheated soup. A nurse with gentle hands helped me change into a gown, asked if I had someone to call. I shook my head. "You'll feel better soon," she said. I didn't answer. The tests came quickly. Blood work, EKG, some rapid scans. I stared at the ceiling tiles and waited. I counted the cracks between them. 23. Then started again. When Dr. Falk finally entered, her face was too calm. She sat down beside me, crossing her legs, hands folded. "Delith," she began, "we got your results." I braced for the words I'd heard before, stress, dehydration, anxiety, but instead she said, "There's no trace of medication in your system." I blinked. "That's impossible." "We triple-checked. The medications listed in your chart, none of them are showing up." "You think I forgot to take them?" She didn't nod, didn't shake her head either. "Have you changed pharmacies?" "No. I use Walton's, same place for years. I even keep the log, look." I showed her the app, every dose marked with a time, a check mark, a note. She looked it over, but her expression didn't shift. "Is there a chance someone else handled your prescriptions?" The question hung in the air like cigarette smoke. "No," I said. "They're in my room. I take them myself." "They looked the same?" she asked gently. "Exactly the same." She hesitated. "Do you still have them with you?" "They're in my bag." "We'll take a look." I felt myself nod. But inside, the world began to tilt again. Not from a seizure this time, but from something deeper. A shaking that started not in my limbs, but in my core. I lay there after she left, clutching my blanket, cold despite the heat. I replayed the last week, the last month, the tremors, the fatigue, the pain. It hadn't been just in my head. It hadn't been anxiety or stress or any of the reasons people tell you when they don't want to look deeper. Then I heard her voice in my head. My mother's. "You don't need those pills, sweetheart. You're just tired." They looked the same. But maybe they weren't. I stared at the bottle in my hand, fingers trembling slightly, the label curling at the edges from weeks of handling. They looked the same. Same shape, same size, same faint imprint on each tablet. But something inside me had shifted, something that refused to let me chalk it up to imagination anymore. 2 days had passed since the seizure, and the fluorescent lights of Sacramento General Hospital had become both familiar and unbearable. I'd stopped counting the footsteps of nurses outside my door and started watching the way shadows moved along the tile floors instead. The world inside these walls moved slower, like it knew I wasn't quite ready to face what was beyond them. When Dr. Falk walked in that afternoon, she didn't bother with pleasantries. She sat on the edge of my bed and looked me in the eye the way people do when they're about to say something they can't soften. "Delith," she said, "your pill bottles, they're filled with glucose tablets. We tested 3 of them, no active medication." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. I blinked, searching her face for a hint of misunderstanding, but there wasn't any. Her tone was calm, her eyes steady, but her words felt like someone had cracked open the floor beneath me. "Glucose?" I repeated, the word tasting like chalk. "Yes, placebos. They were made to look like your prescriptions, but chemically, there's nothing in them." The air around me thinned. I sat back, my spine pressing into the stiff hospital pillows. "So I'm not just getting worse. I've been taking nothing?" She nodded slowly. "Your symptoms match medication withdrawal. This seizure, it was severe. You didn't imagine this. None of it was your fault." That should have comforted me. But all it did was move the weight off my shoulders and drop it somewhere I didn't want to look. 2 hours later, my mother arrived. Vera swept into the room in her usual way, composed, polite, not a hair out of place. She had a small bouquet in hand and a tight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The kind of smile you wear when you've already decided what everyone else in the room should feel. "Oh, sweetheart," she cooed, setting the flowers on the windowsill. "Maybe this is a sign, a way of telling you it's time to slow down." I tried to sit up straighter. "The doctors found something." She waved a hand. "Doctors these days love drama. Everything's a crisis. In my day, we didn't run to the ER for every little thing." I inhaled slowly, trying not to snap. "It's not that simple. They tested my medications, the ones I've been taking." She murmured, adjusting the flowers. "They weren't real, Mom." She looked at me then, really looked. Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes narrowed just a fraction. "Well," she said carefully, "maybe you just picked up the wrong batch. These pharmacies. It happens." "No," I said, firmer now. They ran multiple tests. These pills, they were fakes. Someone replaced them. Her response came too quickly. I'm sure it was just a mix-up. Something in me cracked. I'd lived under her version of logic for 32 years, but now the cracks were too wide to ignore. Did you do it? I asked quietly. She blinked, genuinely startled. Excuse me? You always said I didn't need them, that it was all in my head. So did you? Her voice rose just slightly. You don't get to accuse your mother of poisoning you. I didn't say poisoning, I said replacing. She pressed her lips together and took a slow breath, as if disappointed that I'd forced this conversation into the open. I don't know what's gotten into you, she said finally. This victim thing. It's beneath you. The door opened then, saving us both. Doctor. Falk stepped in, clipboard in hand. Vera, she nodded politely. We're doing some additional testing. Based on what we've found, there's reason to believe Delith's medications were tampered with. Vera turned to her, her tone instantly brighter. Oh, goodness. Well, if there's anything I can do... Dr. Falk didn't smile. We've collected the remaining pills and started a full analysis. Of course, Vera said, smoothing her blouse. I'm sure it's all just a misunderstanding. Dr. Falk nodded slowly, her gaze sharp. Perhaps, but misunderstandings like this can be fatal. The silence that followed wasn't accidental. Later that evening, after Vera had left and the scent of her perfume had finally faded from the room, Dr. Falk returned with a different kind of calm in her eyes. She pulled up a chair and sat, elbows resting gently on her knees. Delith, she said, her voice low, can I ask, who else has access to your medications? I hesitated. My parents have a key to my room, for emergencies. My sister too, but she doesn't. She's not really around. Has anyone ever questioned your need for these medications? Suggested you didn't really need them? I felt the familiar sting behind my eyes. All the time. She leaned back. I know this is hard, but I need you to consider something difficult. It's possible, likely even, that someone replaced your medication intentionally. No, I said too quickly. They wouldn't. Her voice didn't rise. Wouldn't they? The room went quiet again. Not from silence, but from the echo of that question. I didn't answer. Because part of me had already started. I didn't answer Dr. Falk that day, not with words. I just looked out the window for a long while after she left, watching the clouds blur into each other like the thoughts in my head. I told myself she was wrong, that no one who says I love you would do something so calculated. But even then, even before the real evidence came, I knew something had already cracked open. That night, the rain started just past 9, soft at first, just enough to tap the hospital window gently. I turned my head toward it, feeling the rhythm of each drop against the glass as if it might ground me. The nurses had dimmed the hallway lights, and the room had that hush that only late hours bring. It was the kind of silence that forces memories up from places you thought you'd buried. My mind wandered to numbers, of all things, not birthdays or anniversaries, but monthly costs, numbers that had become so familiar they ran on autopilot in my brain. $320 for lamotrigine, $115 for hydroxychloroquine, $80 for the muscle relaxer I didn't even like, but couldn't go without, $45 every other week for blood work at the discount clinic. I'd done that math 100 times, quietly, while holding a receipt in my hand or staring at an empty checking account, and not once, had anyone in my family asked me if I needed help. They just assumed I was being selfish, that I wasn't generous enough. A few months ago, Malis had looked at me across the dinner table and said, "You know, we all contribute, Del. Maybe you could show up a little more?" She smiled when she said it. As if it were a suggestion, not a verdict, no one had batted an eye. But what they didn't see was me standing in line at the pharmacy, counting crumpled bills like a teenager buying cigarettes, or taking out a cash advance I knew I couldn't pay off just to fill 2 weeks' worth of pills. I'd skipped rent twice, borrowed money under an old friend's name once, something I'm still ashamed of, to avoid missing a refill. But none of that counted, apparently. Not when they couldn't see it on paper, not when it wasn't flashy. And still, I helped pay for Logan's therapy sessions, my nephew, Melis's son, when the school flagged anxiety concerns. I handed Vera $200 in cash last fall when the water heater broke. I didn't ask for receipts. I didn't tell anyone. I just gave. And somehow, it still wasn't enough. I remember sitting at the edge of my bed last winter, watching snow fall outside while my joints ached like they were full of glass. Vera had called me that evening, asking if I could swing by to help Melis with the fundraiser dinner. I said I didn't feel well. She paused, then sighed. You never feel well. There wasn't anger in her tone, just disappointment, as if I'd failed some secret test no one told me I was taking. Later, I learned Melis had been praised for organizing everything by herself. Vera toasted her at the dinner table with sparkling cider. At least Melis shows she cares, she'd said. At least. There was always that undertone, like I was the bonus child, the one they didn't expect, didn't plan for, didn't quite know what to do with. And then came the birthday party. It had been Vera's 62nd, thrown at our cousin Hannah's place in Folsom. The weather was good, one of those warm spring Sundays where you could feel summer stretching its legs. I remember showing up early, balancing the bakery box with both hands, heart thudding a little too fast from the hill I'd walked up. I'd picked the cake myself, dark chocolate raspberry, her favorite, and paid cash to avoid Melis asking how I could afford it. Everyone was already there when I arrived. The tablecloths were pressed, the lemonade was sweating in pitchers. Vera hugged me with one arm and said, "Oh good, we were wondering where the cake was." Not where I was, just the cake. During her toast, she went down the line like it was a ceremony. She thanked Melis for handling decorations, Elowin for music, even Oren, our dad, for staying out of the way. Me? Nothing. Not a glance. Not a nod. I stood in the corner of the kitchen near the fridge, a plastic cup in hand, my name never spoken aloud. The cake got compliments, though. Everyone raved about it. "This is amazing," Aunt Marla said. "Where'd you get it, Melis?" Melis smiled. She didn't correct her. I didn't eat a slice. Back in the hospital room, I shifted under the blanket and looked at the ceiling. The rain had picked up. Somewhere in the hallway, a machine beeped. I whispered, "I gave everything I had." Then, barely audible. And they didn't even notice. It wasn't self-pity. It was just the truth laid bare. I'd been the one they forgot while I was still in the room. And maybe that was worse than being hated. I didn't respond to her question, but I didn't need to. The silence was heavy enough to answer for me. Later that night, when the nurses changed shifts and the hallway lights dimmed again, I lay awake watching the shadows move slowly across the ceiling. The rain had stopped, but the wet pavement outside still caught the occasional glint from a passing car. That sterile quiet, the kind that makes your ears ring with memory, settled into the room, and all I could hear was that one question, wouldn't they? It burrowed into my chest like a splinter, and no matter how much I tried to push it out with logic or excuses, it stayed lodged there, pulsing. Who had keys to my room? Who knew when my prescriptions were ready? Who told me again and again, "You're overreacting," even when my body was screaming otherwise? I reached over to the small table beside my bed and picked up the pill bottle again. I rolled it between my fingers. I knew that bottle. I knew every scratch on the label, every slight bend in the plastic cap, but I didn't know what was inside anymore. The trembling in my hand wasn't just neurological this time. It was fury. It was grief layered over doubt. What if it wasn't an accident? What if it had been happening for months, and I'd been defending them the whole time? I squeezed my eyes shut and turned to the wall. Sleep didn't come easily, but when it did, it was shallow and restless. The next morning, around 10, Dr. Falk returned. She looked more tired than usual, like she hadn't slept either. She greeted the nurse outside before entering and closed the door softly behind her. "I need to show you something," she said. My stomach turned before I even sat up. She pulled up a chair beside me, set her tablet on her lap, and tapped the screen. "This is from Walton's Pharmacy, the day before your last refill." The video wasn't high resolution, but it didn't need to be. The timestamp read 2:47 p.m. The camera was positioned above the consultation window. I saw my sister Malis, hair in a low bun, sunglasses perched on her head like a headband, step up to the counter. She smiled, spoke to the pharmacist, signed something. Then she took the white pharmacy bag, walked a few steps toward the side counter, and sat down. The angle was perfect. She opened the bag, pulled out each prescription bottle, looked around casually, then took a small pouch from her purse. I watched her dump the contents of one bottle into a separate zip-top bag. From her pouch, she pulled out a second set of pills, identical in size and color, and dropped them into the now empty bottle. She did it efficiently, like it wasn't the first time. Doctor. Falk paused the video. She did this 3 separate times that we could confirm, she said quietly. We pulled 6 months of footage. I couldn't speak. My mouth went dry. She knew exactly what she was doing, I finally whispered. Yes, Dr. Falk replied, and she didn't seem nervous about it. The words settled in the pit of my stomach, cold, heavy. I stared at the frozen image of Malis on the screen, the way she tucked the bag back into the pharmacy pouch like she was wrapping a present. For a moment, I told myself maybe she thought she was helping, that maybe she'd found a cheaper alternative or had been misled by someone, that maybe this was just another misguided attempt at tough love. But the footage told another story. The next clip played. Malis again, different day, different clothes, same process. She handed over the bag like it was routine. She smiled at the staff, joked with them. At no point did she look guilty. Not a single flinch. She'd known. And she had chosen. The betrayal burned through my chest like acid. She had watched me lose weight, seen my hands shake, heard me on the phone talking about how the pain was worse. She'd nodded. She'd said, "You need to get more rest," all while handing me sugar pills. She used my illness like a mirror, I murmured, to make herself look more compassionate. Dr. Falk didn't answer. She just let the silence stretch. I turned away from the screen and let the tears come. Not the kind that burst out in sobs, but the slow, steady kind that start in your throat and make everything inside ache. I thought back to all the times Malis had shown up with soup, the kind of soup she knew I liked. Homemade, she'd say. Always right around the time I hit a low point, after a flare, after a bad night. She'd place it on the table, hand me a spoon, sit beside me, and smile. "Take your pills," she'd remind me. I used to think she was watching over me. Now I knew she'd been watching me. After Dr. Falk left, I lay back in the bed, letting the storm inside settle into a cold quiet. Hours passed. A nurse came in, checked vitals, replaced my IV, said something about discharge plans in a few days. I nodded through it all. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I opened my journal and wrote one sentence, over and over, across the page. They knew. When the ink smudged from the weight of my hand, I closed the book and stared out the window. Dr. Falk came again in the morning. She looked different this time, less clinical, more human. She sat without asking and said, "I know this is hard, but it's important you understand the implications." "I do," I said. She hesitated. "I need to ask again. Is there anyone else who might have been involved?" "My parents have a key to my room," I replied slowly, "for emergencies." "And they voiced concerns about your medication use in the past?" I nodded. "They think I don't need them, that I'm too dependent." She leaned forward. "And what do you think?" I paused, then whispered, "They've been slowly killing me." Dr. Falk's eyes didn't flinch. "And you still think they love you?" I opened my mouth. Nothing came out, because that was the worst part. I wanted to say yes. I needed to say no. The air in the hospital room felt different after that. Dr. Falk left, giving me space, but her words stuck like splinters under my skin. I hadn't responded to her question about whether they loved me, and the silence that followed still rang in my ears. That morning, the rain had stopped, leaving behind gray clouds that pressed low and heavy against the hospital windows. A nurse brought in breakfast I didn't touch. I sat upright, back propped against stiff pillows, legs crossed beneath the thin sheet. My phone buzzed on the table. A message from Malis. "Mom's heading up in a bit. Said she has your favorite tea. It read like concern, like love. But now I knew better. I turned the screen face down and watched the second hand on the wall clock sweep slowly around. 30 minutes passed before Vera appeared in the doorway, perfectly timed like always. She stepped in with a small reusable bag and that composed half-smile that never changed, no matter the circumstances. "Morning, sweetheart," she said, pulling up the chair beside me. "You look a bit better today." "I feel the same," I replied, voice even. She reached into the bag and pulled out a tin. "Brought your Earl Grey. I thought the cafeteria tea probably tastes like cardboard." I nodded, but didn't reach for it. She sat back, crossed her legs at the ankle, and folded her hands. "You know, I've been thinking, maybe this whole thing happened for a reason. Maybe it's a way for you to pause, realign your thinking. Health starts with mindset." I blinked slowly. "This isn't about mindset, Mom. It's about someone switching my medication." "Well," she said softly, "even if that's true, and I'm not saying it is, isn't it also worth asking what made your body react the way it did? Stress plays a huge role in chronic symptoms." I stared at her, numb. "Are you suggesting I caused the seizure?" "I'm suggesting," she replied, brushing invisible lint off her sleeve, "that sometimes our subconscious looks for ways to cry out." She said it like she was helping, like she was sharing deep maternal wisdom. But I wasn't 12 anymore, and I knew what this was. I didn't imagine my blood work, Mom. I didn't fake months of neurological decline. "I'm not saying that," she replied too quickly. "But I've read your journal, Daleth. I know how overwhelmed you've felt. I know how lost you've been." The words hit harder than they should have. My spine straightened. "You read my journal?" Her expression didn't shift. "It was in your desk." "In my locked drawer," I said, the edge of my voice sharpening. "I was worried," she said, a little too calmly. "You write some dark things, you know. It made me scared for you. You had no right." "I had every right," she snapped quietly. "I'm your mother." And there it was. I could feel my fingers curling into fists beneath the blanket. "You didn't read it to help me," I said slowly. "You read it so you'd have ammunition, something to hold over my head." Her face remained neutral, but her voice dropped a register. "Your writing proves how unstable you are. You admit it in your own words. You exaggerate. You spiral. You make yourself sick with your own thoughts." "Is that what you told Malis?" She tilted her head, not answering. The betrayal wasn't loud or violent. It was surgical, cold, clean. Her reading my private thoughts wasn't a violation out of desperation. It was strategy. She'd always loved being the calm one, the martyr who had to deal with the dramatic daughter. But now I saw it for what it was: control. After she left, I sat in silence, chest tight. I wanted to scream, but all I did was breathe through it, in and out, until the tightness became something else: resolve. That evening, the sky turned amber, and the air inside my room thickened with anticipation. I knew what I had to do. I picked up my phone and sent a message to Malis. "Can you stop by later? I need help with something." She replied within 5 minutes. "Of course. Be there in an hour." Just after 7, Malis arrived, smiling like nothing was wrong. She greeted me with a cheerful, "How are we feeling today?" and placed a tote bag near my bed. I made small talk, just enough to disarm her. Asked her if she could help organize some paperwork I'd left in the drawer. Told her I needed to close out some old insurance claims before I left the hospital. While she busied herself near the side table, I reached behind the pillow and pressed record on my phone, already hidden beneath the thin folds of the sheet. I asked her how things were at home, if Mom was sleeping, if Dad had said anything about the tests. She smiled without looking up. "He thinks you're being dramatic, same as always." "Does Mom?" She paused, then chuckled lightly. "She thinks this might be a good thing, a reset. Maybe now you'll stop clinging to all those pills and see how much better you can be without them." My throat burned. I kept my voice flat. "So, the seizure was necessary?" "She's worried, of course," Malis said, still avoiding eye contact. "But honestly, Del, we were all scared. You kept getting worse, and nothing changed. Maybe it's time you faced the truth." I didn't say anything. Let the silence stretch. Then Malis added casually, If this wakes you up, maybe it's what needed to happen. And there it was. They weren't even pretending it was an accident anymore. After she left, I waited until the hall was quiet again. Then I played back the recording. Their voices, soft and sure. Vera's. She's fragile. That's the problem. Malis. If she crashes, maybe she'll finally stop pretending she's sick. They sounded like they were talking about a business strategy, not a person, not their daughter, not their sister. I saved the file, uploaded it to a hidden cloud folder, added a password only I knew. Then I pulled up Malis's contact and typed a single message. Next time you open my pill bottles, I'll be opening a case file. The moment the message was sent, I didn't wait for a reply. I placed the phone face down on the windowsill and stared out into the dusky sky. My discharge papers had been signed that morning. By this time tomorrow, I would be gone from this sterile room, from the sharp scent of antiseptic and latex gloves, from the hallway whispers and fluorescent lights. I should have felt relief, but all I felt was a simmering pressure behind my ribs, like something inside me had been boiling slowly for years and was only now beginning to bubble over. Dr. Falk had offered to refer me to a patient advocacy lawyer. I'd told her I'd think about it. Truthfully, I already knew I was done thinking. I was about to act. I had someone from the hospital drive me home late in the afternoon. The sun was beginning to dip, casting long golden slants across the sidewalks and drying the last of the weekend's rain. Everything looked softer than it felt, like the neighborhood hadn't noticed anything had changed. But I had. When we pulled up, the house looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe I'd just outgrown it. Either way, the familiarity didn't comfort me. It tightened something in my chest. I walked up the steps slowly. My bag was light, just essentials. I wasn't staying. The front door creaked open. Malis was in the kitchen, standing by the stove like she owned the place. Her head turned slightly when she heard me, but she didn't flinch. "Hey," she said with that too bright smile. "Back so soon?" I didn't answer. Vera was on the phone in the living room, her voice lowered, but when I stepped into view, she paused and said, "Let me call you back," before hanging up and setting the phone down. "Sweetheart," she said, her tone wrapped in velvet. "You're home." I didn't answer her either. I went straight to my room. Everything looked untouched. That, in itself, was its own kind of violation, because I knew now it wasn't untouched at all. I opened the top drawer of my desk and found what I expected. Mail, unopened, piled carelessly, most of it with my name on it. I sat at the edge of the bed and started opening envelopes, one after another, overdue notices, past due balances, letters from banks I didn't recognize. The handwriting on the return address was unfamiliar, but the consequences were mine. One envelope had been stuffed with 3 notices. One of them read, "Final Warning." I flipped it over, stared at the printed name. Delith Hayes. My name, my debt. Then I found the folder. It was buried under a stack of loose magazines and receipts. Inside were loan documents, pages of them, pages that showed a $15,000 personal loan taken out in my name 6 months ago. The signature was mine, or it looked like it. Someone had copied it well. I held the papers with shaking hands. I never applied for a loan. I never even knew one had been taken out. I could still hear Malis's voice in my head. "You never help around here. We all do our part, Del." They had stolen my identity, used it, and still found the nerve to call me selfish. I sat there for a long time, staring at the documents, the unpaid statements, the forged initials. Then I got up and walked into the hallway. Malis was on the phone now, laughing softly, the way she always did when she wanted someone to think she was harmless. I walked past her without a word and headed for the dining room. The drawer in the buffet cabinet, where I knew Vera kept miscellaneous paperwork, was still hard to open, still stuck at the corners. I yanked it until it gave. Inside was a card. It read, "Malis, thank you for helping with the roof repair. We couldn't have done it without you. Love, Mom." The same repair I paid for. $2,000 in cash, handed over without question when Vera mentioned the leak. I placed the card on the table beside the forged loan documents. Then I pulled out my phone and snapped photos of everything. I remembered helping Elowen's kids buy school supplies last August when she said things were tight. I remembered the gift cards I bought for groceries, the babysitting I did when Malis had late meetings. None of it had been acknowledged. All of it had been attributed to someone else. I remembered sitting silently through family dinners, hearing them praise each other while looking right past me. Vera once toasted Malis for being the backbone of the family. I'd nearly choked on my water. It was never about what I gave. It was about who they wanted to see as the giver. And I wasn't that person. I gathered the documents into a folder and returned to the living room. They were both there now, Malis lounging on the couch, Vera folding laundry like we were in some Norman Rockwell painting. I set the folder on the dining table. "I'll be forwarding these to a lawyer," I said evenly. They both froze. "What is that?" Vera asked, her voice forced casual. "Everything," I said. "Every debt I didn't create, every lie you signed with my name." Malis stood up. "You're blowing this way out of proportion." "No," I said, louder now. "You've minimized me my whole life, called me dramatic, difficult, ungrateful. But you know what I am now?" They didn't respond. I stepped closer, staring at Vera. "I'm awake." Vera's eyes narrowed. "This family has always supported you. Always." I didn't blink. "You supported a version of me that stayed quiet, that played sick only when it didn't cost too much. But I'm done being quiet." I turned and walked toward the door. Just before stepping out, I looked over my shoulder. "I warned you once. This is me, listening to myself." After I left that folder on the table and walked out of that house, I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't slam the door, even though it would have felt good. I just walked, calm and deliberate, like a woman who finally stopped making excuses for people who never gave her the same courtesy. A week later, I was in a small rented apartment downtown. It was one of those short-term furnished deals, barely decorated, all beige walls and factory-made furniture, but it was mine. No one else had keys. No one else decided who I could be inside those walls. The silence here didn't make me feel small. It made me feel safe. The kitchen window overlooked the alley, and the heating unit clicked every time it ran. The bed was too firm. But for the first time in years, I slept through the night. No one was telling me I was imagining things. No one was switching my pills. No one was gaslighting me under the name of helping. On a Thursday morning, just past 10, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Detective Graves. "Footage is in. You'll want to see this." I didn't text back. I just put on shoes, grabbed my coat, and left. When I got to the station, Graves was waiting in a small side office with a neutral face and a laptop open in front of him. The blinds were drawn. The room smelled faintly of coffee and dust. "Have a seat," he said. I did. He tapped the spacebar and turned the screen toward me. "This was taken from your parents' hallway camera. You mentioned there was one still active above the laundry room entrance?" I nodded. The footage started rolling. The angle wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. I saw her, Vera, walking down the hallway in house slippers and gloves. She was carrying my medication bag. She opened it slowly, removed one bottle, unscrewed the top, and began to pour the pills into a different container. There was no hesitation, no glance over her shoulder. Her movements were methodical, practiced. "She didn't even flinch," I said quietly, like she was brushing her teeth. Graves let the footage run another few seconds. Then he paused it and looked at me. "She did this 3 different times, all recorded. Each time, same gloves, same method. There's no doubt she knew exactly what she was doing." He clicked open a folder and pulled up screenshots, timestamps, stills, side-by-side comparisons. Everything lined up. They'd built a timeline, built a case. "I'll need you to confirm the identity for the official record," he said. "I confirm," I replied without hesitation. "That's my mother." That evening, after I got back to the apartment, I sat at the table and opened my laptop. I wasn't sure what I was looking for at first. Maybe distraction, maybe validation. But then I remembered the cloud backups I used years ago, the ones that automatically saved iPhone data before I switched devices. I logged in. It took a few tries to get the password right. Once inside, I scrolled through the synced messages. Some of them were just old group chats, shopping lists, birthday plans. But then I saw it, a message thread between Vera and Melis. It was from around the same time I began having major flare-ups. The first one read, "She's fragile. Let her crash. Maybe then she'll stop pretending." I stared at it for a long time. Then I kept scrolling. More messages, cold, clipped, full of unspoken strategy. "Will control the meds. She doesn't need half of what she's taking. She's too dramatic. This will help her reset. No misreading it. No gray area. This wasn't concern. This was calculation." I sat back in the chair and let the weight of it settle. They hadn't just hurt me. They planned it. The next day, I sent an email. No words, no explanation, just 2 attachments, 1 video file, 1 screenshot of the messages. I sent it to every relative with an email address, my aunts, uncles, cousins, even the family friend who still ran potlucks at church. I didn't need to defend myself anymore. I didn't need to beg them to believe me. I just sent the truth. The responses came in waves. Some were immediate. "Oh my God, Del, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. This is horrifying. You didn't deserve any of this." Others were silent. No reply, no read receipt. And then, after an hour, one message arrived from Vera. Just one line. "You've embarrassed us." I read it, then read it again. Embarrassed. Not hurt, not ashamed, not sorry. Just embarrassed. That word told me everything I ever needed to know. A few days later, I met Graves again. "We're filing," he said simply. "Tampering with prescription medication, identity theft, insurance fraud. This crosses the line." I nodded. "They crossed it months ago." He smiled faintly. "We'll need you for a deposition. I'll make sure you're protected." My voice didn't shake when I replied, "I'm not afraid of them anymore." Because I wasn't. This wasn't fear now. This was justice. This was a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to reclaim. I'd said it plainly to Detective Graves. They crossed the line months ago. But it wasn't until I sat across from them in that courtroom that I truly understood just how far they were willing to go. The morning of the hearing was quiet, in that unnerving way only legal proceedings can be. The courthouse hallway smelled faintly of old carpet and polished wood. My attorney met me at the entrance and led me through the side corridor meant for protected witnesses and high-stress parties. I didn't ask why we were using it. I already knew. Inside the courtroom, Melis sat next to Vera, her posture stiff and her blazer too crisp. Vera wore a muted gray dress, not her usual pastel tones. She looked older than I remembered, or maybe the truth had finally started showing on her face. Oren was there too, silent as ever, sitting on the edge of the bench like he couldn't quite commit to being present. Dr. Falk sat to my left at the front of the room, ready to read my statement on my behalf. The medical team had advised against me testifying in person. Stress could trigger another episode, they warned. I agreed, but part of me wanted to stand up and shout every word myself. Instead, I nodded for her to begin. She stood, cleared her throat, and read with the steadiness of someone who had walked me through seizures, breathless nights, and needle after needle of lab work. She trusted her family, she said clearly. She let them into her bedroom, her records, her routine, and they used that trust as cover to swap her medication for placebos over and over for months. What you see in this courtroom is not just physical damage, it's spiritual theft, a dismantling of a life, one pill bottle at a time. The room was still. Even the judge looked uncomfortable. Some jurors wiped at their eyes. Others stared at the floor. Across the aisle, Vera sat motionless. Melis blinked slowly, expression unreadable. Oren looked down and didn't look up again. When the prosecution played the video clips of Vera replacing the pills, of Melis signing the pharmacy forms, the courtroom didn't gasp. There was no dramatic outcry, just a long, collective silence. The kind that wraps around you like cold water. That evening, I was back at my apartment when Graves sent the footage. "Security hallway cam," his message read. "Thought you should see this." It was a grainy clip from just after the verdict. Vera and Melis walked through the corridor outside the courtroom. No reporters, no jury, just them. Vera turned to Melis and smiled. "Good thing she didn't testify," she muttered. "Might have fooled the jury. I stared at the screen for a long time. She'd heard everything read aloud, the diagnosis, the timeline, the recorded calls. She'd watched the jury deliver a unanimous guilty verdict. And still, she believed it was about performance. Control ran so deep in her veins, even a courtroom couldn't bleed it out. I closed the video. I didn't forward it to anyone, not yet. 2 days later, a small brown envelope arrived at my door. No return address, no postage stamp. Someone had dropped it by hand. Inside was a USB drive. No note. I plugged it into my laptop with shaking hands. There was only one file. Audio, tinny, slightly distorted. The kind of recording that came from a kitchen recorder or an old phone placed face down on a table. And it was her, Vera, clear as day. "She's a drain," she said. "A burden, always has been. I wish she'd just go already. God knows it'd save us all trouble." The file ended there. I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything. I smiled, not out of joy, but because for the first time, I wasn't questioning myself. I wasn't wondering if I had misunderstood. I wasn't trying to reframe her cruelty as concern. I knew. That same afternoon, I stood behind a podium at a small community hall just outside Sacramento. It wasn't a big crowd, maybe 60, mostly women, a few men, a handful of college students with notepads. The topic was navigating medical gaslighting in the family. I was the closing speaker. The host introduced me gently, careful not to oversell the trauma. I took the mic and looked out at their faces. No one smiled politely. No one looked away. I cleared my throat. "My name is Delith Hayes," I began. 2 months ago, I had a seizure in the middle of a cafe shift. That seizure saved my life, because it led to blood work, which led to a discovery. My medications hadn't been medications at all. They were sugar pills, swapped, disguised, and placed carefully back into my bottles. And it didn't happen once. I paused. It happened for 6 months. And it was done by the people who were supposed to love me. You could have heard a pin drop. I let the silence settle before continuing. There's this idea that family means safety, that if someone is blood, they must want the best for you, but not all family is safe, and not all homes are shelters. The applause started slowly, one person, then two, then the whole room. It was the first time I'd been looked at and truly seen. The applause faded slowly, like ripples dissolving across water. I stepped away from the podium and walked toward the back of the community center, nodding politely to those who smiled or whispered, "Thank you," as I passed. I didn't stay for the cookies or coffee. I didn't take pictures with anyone. I didn't need another certificate of courage or acknowledgement. I needed air. Outside, Portland's winter drizzle had returned, fine mist settling over the sidewalks like a veil. I tugged my coat tighter and walked the few blocks back to my apartment. It was small, a converted top-floor unit in an old craftsman house with creaky floors and too many light switches. But it was quiet. And quiet, for the first time in my life, didn't mean suppression. It meant space. My new place wasn't decorated with family photos. No childhood Christmas cards, no faded wedding snapshots on the fridge. Just a single framed print I found at a thrift shop. A woman sitting on a bench, facing the ocean. No face, no name. Just solitude. I dropped my keys on the table, kicked off my shoes, and sat on the couch. My body felt older than 32. Not just from illness, but from what had been done to it. From what I'd been forced to carry, and worse, forced to question. The phone buzzed once, an email from Detective Graves. I stared at the screen before opening it. Subject: Policy confirmed, attached. Final documents. I clicked the PDF, scanning line by line. There it was, clear as anything. The life insurance policy, filed 14 months before I collapsed at the cafe. Beneficiary: Vera Hayes, my mother. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. The walls around me didn't shift, but something inside me did. She planned my death more carefully than she ever planned my birthdays. The line appeared in my head without invitation, and I whispered it aloud. It wasn't dramatic. It was the truth. While I was logging my meds and showing up to work exhausted and trembling, she was signing dotted lines, organizing, plotting, and they said I was the manipulator. The irony might have been funny if it hadn't nearly killed me. Graves had already told me what came next. The DA had filed charges. Vera had been sentenced. A combination of fraud, medical endangerment, and elder abuse stacked into years. Malis, stripped of her professional license, had moved out of state. Oren had retired early, quietly, and no longer answered messages from the family. Elowen disappeared from the group chats, moved to Denver with her husband, and blocked me on every platform. It didn't matter anymore. They weren't in my life. Not by accident, not by estrangement, but by design. My design. My mornings looked different now. I worked part-time at a small bookstore on Hawthorne. The kind of place where customers still asked for recommendations and paid in cash. I organized author events, dusted shelves, sometimes read aloud during rainy afternoons when the foot traffic slowed. There was a woman named June who worked the Tuesday shift. She brought her dog on slow days and always had a snack in her bag. June didn't ask questions about my past. She didn't prod. She just asked, "You okay today?" and accepted whatever answer I gave. In the evenings, I watered the plants on my windowsill. Basil, rosemary, 2 succulents, and 1 stubborn pothos that kept trying to give up. I whispered to it sometimes, "You don't get to quit. If I didn't, you can't." I made dinner, not every night. Some evenings, I microwaved oatmeal or ordered takeout, but I always sat at the table. That was my rule. No meals standing up. No meals in shame. Once a month, I wrote a letter to myself. Not a journal, a letter. I'd start with Dear Dell and end with Love Dellith. I never reread them. I just wrote them and tucked them in a drawer. And every morning, every single morning, I opened my pill organizer, white for seizures, blue for the autoimmune condition, 2 yellows for the pain. I took each one slowly, with intention, with ownership, not like routine, but like reclamation. Because every time I swallowed those pills, I reclaimed a part of myself they tried to erase. Every pill was a middle finger to the people who told me it was all in my head, to the ones who took my illness as inconvenience, to the ones who saw my suffering as an opportunity. I didn't forgive them, but I didn't need to. Forgiveness, for me, wasn't the goal. Peace wasn't some perfect place where I forgot what happened. It was a chair I could sit in without flinching. A bed I could sleep in without checking the lock twice. A morning I could wake up without wondering what version of myself would be acceptable today. Peace was this moment, sitting by the window, rain tapping the glass, tea cooling beside me. No yelling, no manipulation, no second guessing, just breath, just stillness. Each pill, one after the other, marked not just survival, it marked freedom. Each pill, a reclamation, not a routine. Sometimes the deepest wounds come from the people closest to us, not with fists or shouts, but with silence, control, and betrayal wrapped in love. If this story made you pause, ask yourself, have you ever been told your pain wasn't real? That you were just overthinking? You're not alone. And you deserve truth. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely? And if stories like this speak to your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that need to be told.